Thank you all for being here. This is a series that we started many, many years ago, and there's been almost deafening chorus to get it back on track, and very excited to have MoMA back, and to really get it started the right way. There was only one artist that I thought of inviting, and that was Jim Hodges. I'm very happy that Jim, as always, instantaneously said yes, didn't even give it much thought. So Jim, thank you so much for being here. Jim, I think many of you know, is a long friend of mine, a long-standing friend of Flag, one of the great contemporary artists working today, has been working recently living in Milan, of course is in New York, and has been a long-time New York resident. Many of you may have seen his incredible survey that started in Minneapolis, and went to California and Dallas, which we'll talk a little bit about. But Jim, really excited to have you here today. I was saying to Jim before, these things are always great fun for me too, because in the preparation, I always learn new things. And Jim is probably one of the contemporary artists that I know the most. I'm actually also blessed that Jim is the godfather to two of our children, which is a especially nice thing. I love they call him Uncle Jimmy, which is great. But anyway, just to jump into it, one of the things actually that does relate to my kids, my oldest daughter, who's now 12, has wanted to be a veterinarian since she was a very little kid, and she still wants to be a veterinarian. We'll see how long that lasts. She's now in 6th grade. But you, from a pretty young age, kind of knew you wanted to be an artist, right? And is it true that when you were in kindergarten, the teacher even pulled you aside and said you are an artist?
She didn't pull me aside. She told my parents that I was an artist, and my parents were like, why? Like, of all
because
the,
I'm sure most 5-year-olds are doing a lot of drawing.
All the kids that you have here, why is this guy the artist? And the teacher said, well, because I am exposed to children all the time and have been doing this for quite a while, the rare child generates a kind of image making that Jamie, that was my name then, makes. And it's the detail that I was putting in the drawings and collages or whatever it was that I was making, that the Mrs. Kane, my kindergarten teacher,
and did that
noticed.
Stay with you? Did you grasp onto that, and were you like, I'm going to be an artist?
Well, I think that it was something that my parents I had known that I was interested in. I liked making drawings, and because it was how I was spending my time as a little kid. I have 5 brothers and sisters, and my mom could hand a pad of paper and a pencil or pen to me, and I would be fine for hours just sitting there making things, and which made me happy. And I was a kind of shy kid, and so it was a way for me to kind of hide out within that too. So I could make something, it could get acknowledged over here, and I could step back and not have any pressure on me, I guess, if I were to analyze it today.
Was there a moment when you were in high school or otherwise when you thought you might be something else, and what were the other contending professions that you thought you might have been able to see yourself in?
As an artist, I didn't really know what that meant, and I thought, well, I'd like to work for Disney, or I'd like to work for NASA. Those were like things that I thought, those would be things that I could see myself doing. And it's funny because my practice is one of I like traveling. I like going places. I'm anxious, I think, so I move around and change things frequently, and so the astronaut part of that is still probably very true, but I didn't know what to be an artist meant. It wasn't until I was in high school. My high school art teacher told me, when I brought in my paintings that I'd been making at the craft store at the mall, when she told me that it wasn't art, which crushed me, and then said, but I'm going to show you what art is. And she kind of broke me apart and started me understanding a little bit more. So I guess I didn't really know what it meant to be an artist until much later. But
and do you recall like a moment or a time period when you were like, I can actually make a living as an artist, or I can actually be an artist as a profession?
Well, I knew that I was going to be an artist. I just didn't know what that meant. And and in terms of like when I was a kid, I would like win awards at the fair, for my things, or I would get a prize for how I painted the witch on the windows of the mall or whatever. And then I remember a friend of my dad's saw one of these paintings I had made as a kid, and it was this symbolic self-portrait where I'd painted attributes or little kind of cartoon things of what represented me. And he saw that and he was like, "Oh, I want one of those." So it was my first commission, I guess, and I was probably 13 or something. And so I made this thing, and he didn't give me money. He bought me a piece of jewelry, a ring that I had that was this, it was cool. I mean, but I also lost it in the ocean. But not that I didn't think about like making a living. It wasn't something that I really was burdened with, thankfully, and it wasn't anything that was laid on me as a child by my parents saying, "No, you can't do that. You have to be responsible," or whatever. They just supported me to do what I wanted to do, which is
great.
It's not the. I mean, it's a rare story actually, because I don't hear that from a lot of people. I think there's a lot of stress put on people's projection of what's going to happen to you as a child.
It's led to a really nice relationship with you and your parents and your family in general.
It definitely did. I mean, my parents were so supportive and so excited by what I would do, and I think that always stayed with them. Yeah. So I'm very grateful for Mrs. King.
I want to move on from Spokane, Washington, where you grew up, in a second, but you went to Catholic school. What do you think are the long-term implications of your time in Catholic school?
I wouldn't want to insult anyone here, but probably, I mean, I think that I am very fond and admire people with faith and with devotion, and appreciate seeing a kind of enlivened faith in how people behave as individuals, not necessarily as groups, but groups are fine too, but just the individual kind of devotion that one senses from people is something that certainly I was exposed to as a child through my own, education, especially being taught by nuns. And so, but I don't know, it's hard to analyze and to figure out like, what part influences this. But I guess if that might be it, maybe that. And then the flip side of it is also the kind of strange. I'm kind of probably the idiosyncrasies, I think, that also are developed from those kinds of like the rigor or the kind of intensity of a devotion is something that also is, I guess, the flip side of that. But I don't know if I'm making any sense.
No, I mean, I do understand it, and I do think there is, to me, and I think to many viewers, there is a religious content to your work that's not didactic or citing any specific religion. But I think because you use mundane objects oftentimes and things that are kind of simple in some ways, but you're elevating them to in such a unique way, I think it does bring something of a spiritual content to your work, whether it's on purpose or not. I definitely see it there for me, and so whether that's tied directly to that or not, it's definitely a one of the tools I think that you use in your art making.
Oh, thank you, Glenn. I appreciate that. I think as a practitioner, I I've developed a language that that exposes my nature, and I guess that my nature was informed, if that is how it happens, certainly by how I was what I was exposed to as a child, and my family was, religious, and so I was brought up in those in a religious environment. But they were also athletic, and they were also playful, and liked to have a lot of fun. So
Sure.
I had a very full, dimensional childhood.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So you came to New York at a really interesting time to be in New York. Can you just kind of go back and reflect on some of the most vivid memories of your early days in New York City, especially as someone coming from Washington, relatively small city, to the big dynamic New York City at a really interesting time?
Yeah. Thank you, Glenn. I moved to New York in August 28th, 1983, and to go to graduate school at Pratt, and the city was a lot less tame then, and there was a wildness to it and an edge that I really responded to, and a kind of threatening danger that was something that I had to get used to. And I grew up in Spokane. My family always lived close to the edge of town, so I was always near nature in the woods, and I hung up as a kid. That's where I hung out, is in the woods, and that's where I first learned to draw really for myself, to find myself through drawing in the woods. And so when I came here, I was struck by the nature of the place and the man-made part of that, and the grit and the dirty kind of aggressiveness of the city really impacted me. I really liked it. I really, really loved being in the subways. I liked the just the way you could move around in the city. I really liked. All of this was brand new to me. And and then I think I really got into just going out at night and seeing the scenes and seeing how people were expressing themselves.
And you were going to all the hot clubs?
I was going out
to like Studio 54?
Well, I didn't go to Studio 54. I was going to
like Aria,
Area, the World. I mean, I went to Mars. I mean, I went to Save the Robots. I went to lots of after hours clubs and lots of queer places. Like, because I was in the closet when I moved here, and it took me a little while to kind of like get used to being to exposing myself with where my curiosities and my fantasies were, which were queer in nature, and so I started exploring the queer kind of seedy underbelly of the city that really informed me as well. Like that was super influential to me, to be especially at the time the meatpacking district. This part of Manhattan was abandoned basically, and it was there were sex clubs here at night, and after hours clubs that I would go to. The Spike and the Eagle were down the street, and and it was a whole different scene. At the same time, I also, after it was the spring of my first year here, spring 1984, I needed to get a job because I was in school, and my work-study job that was part of my financial aid package wouldn't be effective in the summer, so I needed to get myself a job, and I went through the Village Voice and found an ad in the newspaper for a gallery in Soho, and Nancy Hoffman, yeah, and I went and I applied for a job with Nancy, and
who were the artists that she had then?
Raphael Ferrer, Jack Tworkov, Howard Buchwald, some Louise Fishman paintings that was Louise had worked with Nancy, but she wasn't in her quote stable. Don Eddy.
So it was a real big. It was a real gallery.
It was a
One of the successful
definitely it was a real gallery. It was one of the earlier galleries in Soho. And the thing that was most attractive to me was that but it wasn't Mary Boone and it wasn't Leo Castelli, which were down the street and across the street from Nancy's. So it wasn't those places where other friends of mine had jobs. And so I felt like there was an anonymity that I felt working for Nancy that I wasn't in the midst of what was the place, but it was informing me and teaching me about handling objects, taking care of the art, making crates, installing, doing all the stuff that you do as a preparator in an art gallery. So I was getting all the education without any of that extra stuff that went along with it, thankfully. And and one thing that it did, provide me was I was part of the crowd of young people, young artists working in art galleries, working for art movers, etc., which was the jobs that we were all doing. And because we're in Soho, we went to all the openings and we'd go, to the openings and stuff. And one of the openings I went to was at the New Museum in 1986, and that's where I met Elaine, and that was kind of the beginning of
So
things.
this is Elaine Danheiser. I think many of you may even have known Elaine, one of the legendary, most amazing collectors of contemporary art of all time, frankly, certainly of our generation. Much of her great collection actually was given to MoMA. So MoMA has a lot of amazing works. Most importantly, the great Felix Gonzalez Torres that MoMA has. Often, many of them came from Elaine. You had gone to Pratt for grad school, and I'm curious if you look back, if you felt you got more grad school of education from Pratt or from working at Elaine Danheiser's.
Postgraduate work was at Elaine's for sure. My education was at Elaine's.
Mm-hmm.
It was also at Nancy's, as I said. But what Pratt provided for me was a safe landing pad from transitioning from Spokane to New York. It provided me instantly with peers, with friends, and a context that it was a safe place for me to land. Even though it was in quite a dangerous part at the time, a dangerous part of Brooklyn, at least I had a context that I could, it was easy. It made it very simple. I didn't just come to New York and have to figure stuff out. The school took care of a lot of it. It was fine. But my education really happened in the basement of the Danheiser Foundation, working for Elaine, because of the responsibilities that she bestowed onto me. And
it was all encompassing, right? You were spending a lot of time there.
Yeah, I had made a promise to myself when I got out of graduate school that I wouldn't work more than 3 days a week at any job. That regardless of what that would mean economically for me and what that would look like.
Because you wanted time to make work.
I decided that if a week is 7 days a week, that 4 of those days had to be dedicated to me, and that.
But to you making art, just to be clear.
Exactly, yeah, dedicated to me making my work, and that established my value system, and so working for Elaine, the whole thing was like a New York kind of like story. Elaine is like this angel that ends up in my life who walks me into this space, gives me the keys the first day. It's like, here's the keys to the place, here's how you do the alarm, here you go. It's like, wow. It was incredible. And
your job was just to take care of
everything? I was the preparator for her. And so my job, it was to maintain the physical space, to install the artwork that was coming in. And she was really collecting a lot. And then to clean the space, to be the janitor for the space, and then to give tours of the space and the collection when Elaine couldn't do it and people came, like groups from a museum from all over the world would come there, and Elaine was like, give them a tour. This part of my education was where my talents that I didn't know about actually were exposed to me, that I could, because I was making my own work, of course, but that I could read, that I had enough of a vocabulary, of a literal or a literary visual knowledge, that I could walk into artworks without knowing them and be able to read them. Mm-hmm. And that reading process is what I started sharing with people who were touring the Danheiser Foundation with me.
And clearly that was affecting your own art making, right?
Totally informing me. And well, it started actually with Nancy in terms of working in the gallery and understanding like the longevity or the life expectancy of an object in the hands of others who aren't the artists. Objects take a lot of can be potentially abused or not handled properly, and materials are very delicate, and some artists more so than others, but even a painting on canvas is a delicate object. And the handling and how it's cared for is very important. That's just the kind of superficial maintenance of an object. The objects are also speaking a language that's being articulated to the artist's choices, that's expressing, that's providing content beyond image. It's also the materials themselves, for instance, works like this. And so that knowledge and that kind of exposure to deciphering and learning from other artists, and I'm talking about our conceptual artists from Naumann to Günter Forg, Reinhard Mucke, Felix, of course, and Jeff Koons, and Cindy Sherman. I mean, Elaine was collecting with such such a gusto. Yeah. I mean, she was really. It was a different time in New York as well, and there were less people involved in the art world. The art world was much smaller.
And how long did you work there for?
9 years.
9 years. And were you successful in your 3-day approach?
I was. I probably. Because working for Elaine was actually kicked it over, because I was, working for Elaine. I was working at Nancy's for 3 days a week, but then I was working for Elaine too. So but I was getting that studio in exchange for the work I was doing for her. So that I just figured it was, well, that's not a job.
So you had a studio at the foundation?
In the basement of the foundation. That's how it started. I met Elaine at an opening at the new museum, and we just started chatting, and Elaine was a flirtatious kind of person with young guys, and I was, I think, probably cute and nice, and she was, and I was unlike other people that she was talking to, because I'm from Spokane, and she was like, "Oh, you're very nice. You're not from here. Where are you from?" and so it was like that Spokane kind of like Northwest, talk to anyone kind of friendliness that got me in conversation with her. And anyway, so she took me down to the Danheiser Foundation and gave me keys to the place. And
the studio was part of it.
And the studio was exchanged. The studio in exchange for doing the job for her.
And were you living there for some period of time, like kind of illicitly?
I wasn't supposed to be living there, and I'm sorry, Elaine, because I lied to Elaine a lot, because she would call up and say, "Are you living there?" And it's like, "No, Elaine, I'm not." But I didn't have any money. Gee, who would have thought if you only want to work 3 days a week, living in New York City, you're not going to have any money? Who would have figured that? Anyway, so I had quite a wild ride as a young artist living in New York, and I was more interested in the adventure than I was in the responsibility of being a real adult. So, young people do what they have to do, and part of what I had to do was lie to Elaine and live in the basement of the Danheiser Foundation for a while. But I got caught, of course. And got kicked out.
Oh, you did actually get kicked, but you didn't give.
She brought me back.
Okay.
But yeah, it was a mess. It was not fun.
Right.
It was not.
And then at some point during that experience, you met Felix Gonzalez Torres.
Yeah.
But it was different than many people think. I mean, he really started as a collector of your work, right? He wanted to buy some work of yours.
Yeah, I was in a show at White Columns. Bill Arning was running it at the time, and I had made these drawings on napkins, and and I put one of the installations of these drawings in this group show at White Columns, and I got a call from Bill Arning saying, "There's an artist who wants to buy your piece, but it's a little bit bigger than they can manage. Do you have another piece that you could show him? The artist is Felix Gonzalez Torres. Would it be okay if I gave him your telephone number?" I said, "Yeah, of course." So I was excited because I was an admirer of Felix's work. I was seeing it around. I saw the first piece of his was a stacked typewriter letter stack of pages that was at a group show at Anina Nosei like a few years earlier. I saw his first show at Andrea's of the stacks. So it had been a while, but anyway, so I was very excited to meet Felix, and Felix called me up, and Felix was such a charming guy and such a lovely person. Sorry. Anyway, he goes, "Yeah, I'm interested in your work, and I don't do cocaine, so I got to put my money somewhere, and I like to support young artists, and I really like this thing. Can I come down and visit you?" I'm sorry, I wasn't expecting to be emotional, but.
No, I think it's okay. Take a minute.
So Felix came to my studio and he was like, "Oh, Jimmy, he started calling me Jimmy. Really love your work. I want this piece." And he bought a piece, and then he ended up buying like 3 or 4 more works from me and giving them to collectors and to other artists, friends of his. He introduced me to my friend Julie Alt, who is Felix's collaborator with group material and also his probably closest friend. And meeting Julie it's a thrill. She's an incredible artist and hugely important and influential to me in my development, as was Felix. And so yeah, it was like Felix was also an angel. I'm
curious, Jim, because you mentioned that Felix bought your work and gave it as a gift to other people. And
yeah.
You are one of the most generous artists I know in terms of the things you've done. Is that inspired by some of those early things that Felix did, or was it just something that you already had in your nature?
Well, thank you for saying that. I think that what Felix and I shared was, besides him interested in mutual appreciation of each other's practices, is that we had a lot in common as people. And maybe this is that Catholic, queer boy growing up kind of thing. I have no idea. I've never really thought about it. But I think that whenever I have the opportunity of being jealous, that's interesting, Freudian slip. I have an opportunity to be generous, I think, of Felix, and certainly how he was with me as a younger artist, though we were the same age, but in terms of where we were and in terms of our career trajectories. I don't know. I mean, I think that...
Let me interject, and I'll just tell one story while you take a breath.
Thank you.
Many years ago, there was a master work of Jim's at auction, and I was lucky enough to buy it. And at the time, it was the highest price ever paid for a work of Jim's at auction. And it was mentioned, I think, in the Bare Facts, back when they used to kind of out people for bidding because everybody bid in person. You didn't have a phone. And so I was outed as the buyer of this work. And a few days later, I got a call totally out of the blue from somebody who said, Glenn, you don't know me. You know, I noted that you're now a big collector of Jim's work. I have a really special work of Jim's. I'd like to come see you to talk about it in person, and I'll bring the work with me if that's okay. And I said, okay, you know, of course. As I said, I didn't know the man. And he came to my office, with a box, and he opened the box, and it was a masterpiece, spectacular work of Jim's. And he told me the price, and he said, you know, I'm selling, this was a gift from Jim, and so I feel really bad about selling it, but if I sell this work, I'm gonna get emotional. If I sell this work, I can go to grad school. And he said, yeah, I'm sure I know you'll probably end up telling Jim, but you know, I don't want you to call him right away if you don't mind. Anyway, I said no problem, and I bought the work, and he literally used that money to pay for grad school. And I didn't call Jim right away, but we did end up talking about it. And Jim had the most beautiful reaction, and it's something that I think about to this day, and I actually talk to my children about this. And he says, when, you know, I gave that gift, if it's a real gift, it's a gift. It's now that person's gift to do anything that they want with. And if they want to sell it, they want to keep it, if they want to give it away to somebody else, it's a gift. I really can't control what they do, and it would be wrong for me to give a gift and try to maintain any type of control. And if he sold it to the grad school, wow, that's a beautiful thing. And so, you know, I don't know, it's just something that was very powerful, and it's not the only gift I know about Jim giving to people that ended up having a lot of value, and that I'm sure many people did many beautiful things with those gifts that you did. So it's a great thing that I think artists do with each other and with others early in their career, and I think oftentimes actually not just early in their career, because I've been given, and I've seen artists give away gifts later in their career as well. But it's a very unique thing to artists.
Thanks, Glenn. I think that it's an interesting relationship one has to one's output, and also one's relationship to values. And you know, the privilege of being granted a life that you know, of course, it's from choices we make that we have these opportunities avail themselves to us. But you know, I think especially as a younger artist, one has to get in line with economics and with what's really of value here. And I mean, like I said before, I was lucky that I wasn't, as a child, as a young person, as a young adult, ever burdened with some idea of that there was a right way to make a life, and that right way had to do with economics. I was spared any of that burden. And it doesn't mean that I didn't know much, but when I started making my work, what I knew is that my work had life, and its life expectancy really relied on if if the work were in the world, that the work has to be free to do its job, for it to perform the purpose, the necessity, its usefulness, whatever it is that the work is for you and for everyone who is attracted to it. It's like just one set of eyes. It doesn't take the world to be able to say that's it. It's just one set of eyes. Yeah. It's what the artwork waits for those eyes. And so for me, I wasn't so interested I was only interested in the distribution of the objects. And so giving things away was natural for me, especially because it was not easy for me to be generating them. I make, that's what I do. And it's like, but I don't know what the making's for. The work has its purpose and its usefulness in the world that I can only be the maker. That's my job. I have to, and do that the best I can. The life of it outside of me is its own thing. So my learning from being an artist, like what being an artist has taught me in terms of what's valuable is really that's to me is like that's the gift I've been given, is to understand what matters.
No, it's beautiful, Jim. I think it's really beautiful, and I think that the work, being out there and living and having that life and you know, being enjoyed, right? That's always the issue with museums. So much of the work is in the basement; it's not being enjoyed by anybody, and so it's much nicer to be on somebody's living room or in you know, where it's being seen.
Yeah, agreed.
I want to just come back to the art making for a second, because you know, you are unique in that you make work out of anything. You make work out of simple chain that you buy at the 5 and dime. You make work literally out of napkins from the diner. You make work, you know, photography, drawings, sculpture. You wanted to make work out of stained glass, so you made work out of stained glass. You've made work out of bronze. I mean, you literally do everything. So is that just a quest to constantly try new things? Is it because you think new things allow you to show different emotions or to communicate different things that you can't do in other mediums? Like, what is driving your desire to work in so many different materials? I mean, leather, you know, denim. I mean, it's really incredible.
Well, thanks, Glenn. I am I'm blown through my life from nature, and the nature of me is exposed in the choices that I make and in the things that I generate. So my language is articulating. It's like ideas are I receive ideas, and the ideas are not for me to judge based on their materiality, based on what they signify, based on anything other than me being responsive to the gifts that I receive in idea form. And the ideas generate a relationship or a response materially, and that's where I am. I like I said, I had to figure out a way to get out of my way as a young artist, because I realized that I have lots of ideas and not all of them fit together in some nice package. The models that I grew up with as a young artist were that an artist had a signature style, material, medium, etc., associated with that identity, and that was what you do. And as a young artist, that was not how I was operating. And this gave me concern, because I felt like, well, you have to have that style. You're going to be successful. You better have all this stuff that young people especially can burden themselves with. And I thought, my job is to be true to my ideas. That's it. It's not my job to be in judgment of what those ideas, what the material suggested.
But your ideas are always with a medium at the time, or sometimes you have an idea and then you got to figure out what the medium is.
Sometimes it's a material interest. Sometimes I am attracted to a particular material or the effect of a material. And I mean, come on, look at this. This is tape on a window. This is brilliant work by Tony. It's like this. Artists we're just being true to our natures, I think. Mm-hmm. And mine happens to be one that is, as I said, I've never been short of ideas. It's time is the problem. Yeah. And
well, a lot of those ideas also are maybe not overtly, but they clearly have a lot of autobiography in them. Mm. And I'm wondering if that's a gift, because you always have an endless supply of things about yourself you can make work about, or if it's a burden in any way.
I think that not wanting to be the subject of my work, but understanding that the vehicle or the filtering system of my expression is me. How do I step out of my way so I'm not the one that's being I'm not the subject of my work. So there's the autobiographical. It's like, I don't know anything outside of me. I can speculate and project onto others, but I have to work with this. I utilize this as a stand-in for you all, as a placeholder, if you will, for audience. I generate fantasy. Here's the audience, etc. At times with Felix, for instance, or Julie, or etc., Craig, yourself, there are people who are there that I'm performing for, if you will. But the personal, the personal is where I can't help but being personal. And there are times, especially when I was younger, I wanted it to be about the world more. Like, I wanted this to be literally about the world. There was a period in the 80s that I wanted to be making political work, for instance. I felt it was very important. Like, what am I doing with my life? Why am I need to be talking about these things. But I lack the ability, I lack the skill to utilize language in a particular way that would be literally that. So I knew my shortcomings, but I knew that, so I had to operate from what my strengths are and not try to be something that I am not. So we learn these things, I think, as we mature.
I mean, what I think is so successful about what you do is that there seems to be, to me, a base of autobiography in much of your work, but it's really from more of a broad-based conceptual perspective, so that we all can relate to it. We all can see ourselves in your work. We all can relate to experiences that you may have had yourself that you're talking about in your work, but we are seeing it and remembering our own experiences that relate to that. So it's not so autobiographical that's like, oh, that's the Jim Hodges about Jim Hodges, and so be it. I think it's so successful because we all see those works and we're like, yeah, I've been through that too, or I get that, or that makes me think of my grandmother, or whatever.
Oh, well, thank you. I think that if there's a rigor and a practice, it definitely is to maintain a kind of anonymity within my work. I try to not be in the place of the spotlight. As I said, as a young kid, it was the thing that saved me, was that I could make something that would take any attention on me would be put out into the world there and not on me. So I think that I have been trying to stay out of the line of fire for a long time.
One of the things about your work, and especially working in all these different mediums, is a need, but also clearly a desire to work with collaborators and in collaboration. And that's something that goes way back to maybe your first collaborator, which is your mother. I'm looking at my mother here in the front row. So maybe just share a little bit about that early collaboration with your mother, and if it did in fact inspire a lifetime of great collaboration.
Thank you. Yeah, it was 92 or 93. I was going to spend a month in Spokane. And I thought, I'm going to be there for a month. I need to do something. I need to be working. So I thought up a project that I could make with my mom, and formally make something with my mom. And we made this work called A Possible Cloud. And we'd spend every day working and just sewing by hand these flowers. And it was just a wonderful time, because what it did is it formalized a work relationship with her that put us on equal terms. That it wasn't about mother and son. It was two artists working together. And what was so amazing about it was that my mom, who, here I am, the smarty pants, graduate school, all the rest of it. My mom went to high school, but my mom was very creative. And like I said, my parents were both very supportive of me as a kid and an artist all my life. But my mom was really talented. She was a very talented person and also smart. so our conversations were about concepts, or about what we were doing, what the project was, how is it going to be received, how is it going to be in the world, because it was just this big piece of fabric with I mean, it was huge, 24 feet square, and we were both working on it all the time. It's like, what was this thing? So the piece performed a purpose and a use for my mom and I to get to know each other better in a deeper way in terms of our creative impulses, and also how we saw ourselves as makers. And it just made so much sense. I mean, my mom was my first teacher, if you will. I mean, our parents are our first teachers, and exposing us to ways of working and ways of using materials, etc. So, yeah, that was my first formal collaboration, but I'm a collaborator by nature, I think.
That's awesome. You know, you made a very personal piece about your long and dear friend Craig. Craig actually worked at Flag for a while. He was part of our security team and was here every day for a long time, and we met him, of course, through Jim. And Jim made a spectacular sculpture that has been in New York for a very long time, actually. But unfortunately, it just closed last week. It was in the park downtown. So just tell everybody a little bit about that work, and it's going to New Orleans, right?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, Craig Ducote was my boyfriend, and Craig died of cancer in August of 2016. And Craig and I lived out at the time in Brooklyn, in Williamsburg. And of course, Craig's death was devastating to me, and we had, we were living together, and so Craig was this one of the sweetest people that you would ever meet. And
he had a great voice.
Yeah, and incredibly gifted. He was an amazing singer, a beautiful piano player. He taught himself how to play the piano when he was a little kid. Amazingly gifted artist, and a beautiful, beautiful human being. Incredibly generous. Talk about generous. He certainly been a teacher to me too, in terms of being in the world, in terms of being generous. When Craig died, I'm the holder of all of his earthly possessions are in his room, and so when I went into his room, I thought, and Craig had this way of Craig was also a painter. He's an amazing artist. Craig had a precise way of articulating materials through placement. He would take something that meant something to him, and how he would place it in a room would resonate with something special. So everything in Craig's room had this association and this installation that was present, all of it kind of singing his song. Beautiful relationships that he would find, material relationships, things that he would pair together, etc. And so I thought, okay, well, this is, one of Craig's greatest works is here in this room. And so I photographed the entire thing and 3D scanned his entire room. And when I opened up his closet was of course beautifully arranged. Everything was perfectly spaced. Everything was just perfect. And it was all Craig's installation. And so I thought, I'm going to make a work out of this piece. So I knew that instantly I wanted to make something with Craig's closet, but I didn't know what. And so, as I said, I took thousands of photos and also 3D scanned the entire object, everything in it, and then left his room like that for about a year. And then disassembled it all and put everything, kind of archived it all perfectly when I left. And then I sat with this idea for a while. Flashes of inspiration. Image is how I receive often ideas of making, and opening the doors of Craig's closet, the image was present, and as was the sculptural three-dimensionality of everything, and the architecture. And I'm interested in space. I'm interested experience and movement through space as an artist, and how we find things and how we come upon things, etc. So all of this stuff comes flooding at me, and I thought I had an idea of what I wanted to make, and so I take notes and I write it down, but I didn't make anything. So for a few years, that piece sat in me. I took the digital information and I made 3D prints of some of the details that were in the closet to scale so I could see it. Made large photos to scale, understanding the thing dimensionally. And then Keith Fox, who is the president of the New York City AIDS Memorial, contacted me and asked if I would make a proposal for the AIDS Memorial Park. And so my proposal was Craig's Closet. And so I proposed that I would make a black marble and bronze sculpture that would basically be made from that data that I had collected from his closet. And when Keith saw it, he responded very positively to it and said that he definitely would like to have that at the park. And so then I went out and spent a year basically working in Gafagnana, where I make sculpture in Italy, and and made the closet and then it was unveiled the end of May last year, and it just was deinstalled the end of May, and now is being installed on Thursday at the New Orleans Museum of Art, which just so happens to be where Craig's from, Louisiana. So there's this beautiful kind of poetry of first of all, that Craig's Closet could be sited in the West Village in association with the AIDS Memorial, and across the street from St. Vincent's Hospital, where it was St. Vincent's Hospital. That as a vortex of energy occurring right down there was so spectacular, and I'm so grateful for that. And then to have the piece now going to New Orleans is like, wow, it's just like life really does deliver.
It was an amazing thing, and it was there for a long time, and a lot of people got to see it. So I'm going to try to go to New Orleans because I want to see it down there also.
Yeah, thank you, Glenn.
So Jim, maybe the final question, you had this great survey that was, in several great museums, and you're making great work. What are some of, your life goals? Like, how do you think about yourself? What do you want to do next? What do you want to accomplish? You kind of, I think at one point had some ambitions about having your own studio space, almost maybe something like an Elaine Danheiser. But I think now it's a little bit different. So what are some of the highlights that you want to look at for yourself going forward?
Well, briefly going forward, yeah, I definitely, hopefully will just continue, making my investigations and my inquiry, that's being driven by my curiosity. But something that actually is interesting in terms of like mortality is something that I've always been focused on. I think it was from moving to New York in the early days of the AIDS crisis, and then having many, many friends die at quite young ages. And so the question of like, when am I going to be the next one, kind of questions were part of that. So death has always been, or mortality is always time of life, has always been part of my interests or my thinking. And so as one ages and matures, and it's like, I think, okay, well, what happens in the future? Like, what happens to these things? Like this work of Tony's, for instance. Tony is no longer alive, but this work is here. It's a brand new manifestation generated by Flag to be part of this beautiful exhibition. It's like this is a testament to the life of art that extends beyond the human who's the initiator of this. And this is an important thing, like who tends to these things? Like the care of the objects is something that, it's been part of my formal education from the very beginning. Is like who's caring for these things? How are they being cared for? And where is the language, and where is the meaning? Where is the content, and how is that being cared for? Because we're talking extremely delicate information, right? The objects are so fragile. And it may be, as I said, it could be made out of heavy, hardcore material, but the delicacy or the fragility of the content it can be ruined by something that could destroy its accessibility. The simple, maybe not thinking, blocking something and you can't see it, or muffling something so you can't understand it. It's like language. This is what we're talking. And so it's very important to maintain the language of the artist so that it's receivable from those who it's meant for. Like I said, one set of eyes. Doesn't matter, but if that one set isn't able to see it because of some bad decision and some thoughtfulness or something. So these concerns are always on my mind. I'm always thinking about these things, and they inform how I make and how I'm operating. But I think that and so it generates new ideas and new ways of working, and so I'm along those lines still working.
Constantly looking for some new ways.
Well, it just so happens that it's like, I'm just being, like I said, there's no shortage of ideas. It's like I'm being inspired in different ways. But I just started collaborating with a young artist who I've known for probably maybe close to 10 years. Very interesting person. Strange language, art language, a language that they have. I think that I opened up turned the lights on for them to say, you're an artist, that you're making art here. You may not understand that, but this is art. And so we've been going through this process of kind of deciphering their language. And this is a very interesting process for me because I have never worked with the material of a person in such a literal way, but also in a way that is makes the object another person, if you will. So it's an interesting problem for me.
Well, that's great. Well, I mean, your teacher in kindergarten had it right. You're an artist. Just keep making great art. And thanks for being so eloquent and talking about it, Jim. I really appreciate
thank you,
being
Glenn.
here. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you all very much.